can see.
Okay, so we will start with this. I will not do slideshow. I will do with this only.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay. I am very sorry. We lost quite a few minutes
No issues.
on this. So I want to start by first, invoking the main person who wrote all the Yoga Sutras, Sri Patanjali, Sage Patanjali. So I'm going to, recite the invocation with your mics muted. It would be good if you can repeat it. And what I'm going to do, I will also explain the shloka so that we understand what we are saying when we are reciting this. So let us start reciting. I will recite, you can follow with your mics muted. Yogena chittasya vadena bacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi. This basically means that Patanjali is the sage whom we are honoring. We are bowing our head with folded hands in Anjali Mudra. So Patanjalim pra Anjali anata osmi means I bow down to Patanjali with folded hands in Anjali Mudra. Who is Patanjali? Patanjali is a Pravaram Muninam. He is one of the top Munis. What has he done? He has done Yopakarottam, meaning who has removed, Malam, meaning all the impurities. There are three types of impurities that he has removed. One is he has removed the impurity of the Chitta through yoga. He has removed the impurity of the Bacham through Padena. He wrote a Mahabhashya on Panini's grammar. He wrote Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So Chittasya Malam he has removed through Yogena. Vacham Malam he has removed through Padena. And Sharirasya Malam he has removed through Vaidyakena. He has written Patanjali Tantra. So Sage Patanjali has written these three great works. He has also written other things. So when we start any yoga practice, it is good to remember the person who gave us these gems of advice with which we, learned all these things, because we can say he is basically the beginning of documentation of Yoga Sutras. Let us now come to another shloka, which is from Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the second chapter, where Lord Krishna is advising Arjuna to join with yoga. So he is saying, Buddhi yukto jahatita ubhe sukrita duskrite tasmat yogaya yujyasva yogaha karmasu kaushalam. Professor Tyagaraja yesterday mentioned this phrase, yogaha karmashu kaushalam. And it so happens that this was the logo of my institute, IIT Kharagpur, which incidentally was born in 1951, the same year that I was also born. Now, why this phrase is relevant and why am I presenting it to you? You are all engineering students, and in engineering, we learn the skills of working with engines, meaning basically science and technology. It is very, very important that whatever we do it well. We learn it well and do it well. So what Lord Krishna is saying is, the Buddhi Yukta means with the wisdom that you have received, from all the slokas from 1.1 to 2.49, because this is sloka 2.50, with all the wisdom that you have received over the last so many shlokas, Jahatiha Ubhe Sukrita Duskrite. Sukrita Duskrita means whatever good and bad you have done, they have become now past with your wisdom. Now with this wisdom, Tasmat Yogaya Yujyasva, meaning you get connected. Yujyasva means you get connected to yoga, because yoga is the skill in work. So for all engineers, which is evident from the logo of IIT Kharagpur, which is the first IIT in the country, that yoga karmasu kaushalam is a very, very important phase in the life of an engineer. And hence we should never forget this phase, and we should always try to attain that yoga in the work that we do. So with this invocation, let us now look at a very routine and regular thing called what is our body. Now in our body, it is very, very interesting to see that we have about 206 bones, and these bones are connected with about 360 bone joints. Now why is this information relevant to us? Every day we are using these bones and we are putting pressure on the joints. The pressure is not so much on the bone as much on the joints. And these joints are maintained with some kind of a lubricant and some kind of a mechanical device. So all the mechanical engineers, including Professor Irappa, you all understand that joints are very important in any engineering, any machinery, and they need to be properly designed, manufactured, and maintained. So these 360 bone joints that we have in our body, they need to be properly maintained. If we do not maintain them like any engine, they'll function well. Over 650 muscles. These muscles are what provide the power to the bones and the bone joints, and they provide the power to do any work. So we also need to ensure that our muscles are working well to maintain a proper body. Now let's come to air. Air, you can see there are two figures given, 2,400 kilometers and 7,500 liters. What are these numbers? The total length of the air passage in one human being is 2,400 kilometers. Meaning all the air passages, irrespective of how narrow or thick it is, if you take the total distance to the lungs to the body, it will come to 2,400 kilometers. So every breath that you breathe in, it will travel 2,400 kilometers and come out. So that is the kind of power that is required for the air to travel through these 2,400 kilometers, which comes from our breath. And hence and every day we breathe in and breathe out 7,500 liters of air. So now you will understand that yesterday when people were discussing about breathing and the importance of breathing and how breathing influences life, the prana shakti, this breathing, the air that goes in, 7,500 liters of it every day, has to travel a very long distance. And hence breathing is very, very important for us to maintain control over the body. Food, you will see we are talking about 1 to 2.5 kg and 10 meters. That means the distance traveled by food in our body is very, very small compared to the distance traveled by air. But we give much, much more importance to food than to air. For the 10 meters that the food travels, we spend most of our energies in acquiring that food and preparing that food and eating that food and digesting that food. Food is important, but we must understand the relative relevance of food with air. Then let's come to hormone. In our body, there are many glands which produce different types of liquids and hormones. Now, what are the purpose of these glands? These glands, these hormones and these other liquids, they help the body, all the other organs to function. For instance, when food goes in, it needs some chemicals, liquids to digest the food. Some of that comes from different organs. And these organs are scattered over the body, and we need to maintain those organs as well. So what are the examples of these organs? You have kidney, which cleans your urine. You have your gallbladder, which produces the bile that is required for digesting the food. You have pituitary gland, you have thyroid gland, and you have various other glands. These, though the quantity of these liquids and excretions of these glands, some of them are called endocrine glands and some are called exocrine glands. The quantity is very small, but maintaining balance of these hormones is very, very important for the body, because even a very small deviation of balance in these hormones can make the whole body function in a very, very unnatural and improper way. So while food is important, air is important, hormones, even though they are minuscule in quantity, they are very, very important. For instance, let's take the case of thyroid. If your thyroid is functioning properly, your body is providing, body is doing its metabolism, that is whatever it has to do in terms of food, digestion and distribution of that energy, it is doing it properly. If the thyroid is over-functioning, which is called hyperthyroid, then the whole body will do overwork and your body will become thin. So if the thyroid gland is over-functioning and creating excessive hormone, excessive thyroid, you will become a thin person by losing your muscles and other things, because it is overworking and taking out the energy that it is not getting from the food from your body muscles and the body mass. If it is underworking, that means it is not doing justice to the food and the energy distribution, then your food will not get digested properly. It will get accumulated in terms of fat and you will become an overweight person. So for, let's say, thyroid, one of the hormones, is very, very critical in maintaining your body. You will find that some people are always either too thin or too fat, which means that if they're always like that, probably their hormone is not working properly, and some kind of yoga which treats this hormone disbalance, this thyroid disbalance, can help them to come to normal, body shape and weight. So hormones must be taken care of very, very carefully. Pituitary, another hormone, if it overfunctions, a person becomes very tall. You might have heard in Guinness Book that somebody is 8 feet tall and 7.5 feet tall, or somebody is a dwarf. These are all functions of pituitary gland. So remember that while we cannot see or feel these hormones and these glands, the body needs to maintain a very good balance of the hormones, and these are far, far more important than your muscles and bone joints, because a minuscule difference of hormone will create havoc in the body. Whereas even if you lose one muscle due to some accident or something, that muscle will regrow over time, or even if it does not regrow 100%, it will still work up to a point. But the hormone will create major problem. Now let's come to the brain and the signal. There are 43 pairs of nerves that connects to the brain, and about 12 of them go to different parts directly from the brain, and the rest go to different parts of the body through the spinal column. So most of the nervous system is channeled through the spinal column, and between the different bones they start coming out and they distribute the electrical signals all over the body. Now, brain is a very interesting part of our body. I have written 1.2 kg, 20 watts and 10 times. It weighs about 1.2 kg. So if a person, let's say, is 50 kgs and brain is 1.2 kg. It's not a big part in terms of weight, but it consumes 20 watts of energy all the time. That means a 20-watt bulb is burning from the moment you are born till the time you are alive. It is burning all through without stoppage. So even if you are lying down in bed and doing nothing, your brain will still consume 20 watts of energy. And per gram, energy consumption of the brain is 10 times that of the other parts of the body. So brain is a huge energy consumer in the body. And when we say, quieten down your mind, be calm, cool down, what we are basically saying is reduce this 20 watts to 19 watts or 18 watts. Because this 20 watts, is consuming, it is about 20% of the total energy consumption in the body. Out of 100 watts, it takes about 20 watts. So if you are lying still, the rest of the body consumes not 80 watts, but maybe 20 watts, 30 watts, 40 watts in the normal metabolism. But the brain is a continuous consumer. So when we do this pranayama and meditation, what we are trying to do is we are trying to reduce consumption in the brain and thereby reducing the energy requirement of the whole body. Now this brain, the way it works is whatever it has to do, it gets signals from the nerves and then it gives instructions through them to all the rest of the body parts. So brain controls the whole body and it is important that the brain functions. Now there are different versions of how much of that 1.2 kg of the brain is working, but it is clear that a very small percentage of this 1.2 kg is actually in use on a daily basis. Somebody may use 5 or 10%, somebody may use 3%, somebody may use 30%, but nobody uses anything more than that. So one of the objectives of yoga is to ensure that we increase the usage of the brain that we have to more than what we are doing today. Suppose today I am using 5% of the brain and achieving whatever I have achieved. If I use 6% of the brain, that means I will achieve 20% more. Because with 5% I have achieved something, with 6% it becomes 20% more. If I can use 10%, that means my brain achievement will be double. So with meditation, our objective is to cool down the brain and increase usage of other parts of the brain that today is underutilized heavily. Finally, we come to blood. We have about 5 liters of blood in the body. Some people have 4.5 liters, some people have 5.5 liters, and so on. But these 5 liters travel 100,000 kilometers in the body. 100,000 kilometers. Can you imagine? In our own body, the blood vessels, majorly within the lungs, but all over the body, the total length is 100,000 kilometers. So every drop of blood that you have in that body, in your body, 5 liters, every drop has to travel this distance and come back, and the heart pumps about 7,500 liters every day. So this 5 liters is turned over and over and over again. 7,500 liters. So that's about 1,500 times the whole blood, the whole of 5 liters is turned on. And because the blood works with a small percentage of this 5 liters, so the heart keeps on pumping the blood 50, 60, 70, 80 times every minute. And by accumulation of all those pumping, we pump about 7,500 liters every day. Now, I hope we understand, we get an idea of the enormity of what we have inside the body. So on one hand, we have the structural units like the bones and the bone joints. On the other hand, we have the energy giving units like the food, the alimentary system, the muscles which get energy. Then we have the respiratory system which provides the oxygen to generate or convert food into energy. We have the brain and we have the blood which circulates this energy and collects all the garbage and gets it cleaned up and so on and so forth. So this system of body that we have, which includes the brain and the signal and all that, is what we are handling through yoga. We are handling a little more than this through yoga, but this is one part where the body is handled. Now the question is, what happens to our body if we don't look after it? As engineers, you know that you have to look after any engine, any machinery, any equipment, we have to look after. So what happens if we do not look after it? Let us see that. So this is the damage that happens to the body. This is the damage that happens to the body. Billions of cells die every day. And billions of cells are created every day. So about 1.2 kg of cells die and they are reborn. What does it mean? It means that the cells that we are born with, which are multiplying and growing, and we are also growing, then we come to a point where we are not growing anymore. But cells keep on dying and bifurcating, and through the reproduction and the death, we maintain a balance in the body. This process is automatic and it happens to everybody. But what happens with age is the cells that die are not properly replaced with the cells that are born. The quality of the cells start going down, and that is called aging. A cell is a very complex thing. It has all kinds of things inside and around it. And there are too many ways by which a cell quality can go down. And that happens automatically to everybody. So we have persons who are aging. Even if they are leading a normal life, a person will age. And with aging will come all the difficulties of life, because with aging there will be loss of hearing, loss of eyesight, loss of muscle power, lot of power in the intestine to digest food, lot of power, teeth will be lost, the lungs will become smaller, the heart's ability to pump blood will become lower. So as the person ages, all the bodily abilities will start going down. And there is no way to prevent it. There is no way to prevent it. There are some shlokas in yoga which says you will get eternal life, but that eternal life is not literal. You have to take it metaphorically, meaning that the life that you get may be longer or shorter, but you get a good quality life. So whether you live to 80 or 100 or 150, you get a good quality life. And that is what one part of yoga aims to do and does. Now let us look at another side of this aging, which is called aging of the population. In 2012, there were 6 million or 12% of the population that was 65 plus years. In 2040, that number will be more than double. That means as a whole population, we will have more and more people who are 65 plus years old. Now look at a community where we have 50% people or 70% people who are working. We have 5-10% people or 20% people who are below working age, and the rest are above working age. As the population starts aging, we will have more people in the 65 plus group, which means that there will be less people who are working. But the same people who are working will have to support the people who are not working. That means with the population aging, the society or the community will find it more and more difficult to maintain itself. What is the significance today in a place like Japan, where healthcare system is very good? The number of people who are over 65 plus is very, very large, and hence they are finding it extremely difficult to maintain that population of elderly people. In fact, the whole world is aging. India currently is not aging. India currently has a young population because of the high growth of population. So there are more people in the below working age group and in the working age group. But in most developed societies, where the childbirth ratio is per couple is 1 or less than 2, that is, the population is aging. And a time will come when they will implode and not be able to service their people. With all this, which are natural, there are two other things that are happening to us. Stress. I've given an image of the people, the migrant laborers who had to leave their place of work and walk back home hundreds or thousands of miles. Imagine the amount of stress that they went through. They are working far away from home. They are earning not much. They are not having a lot of savings. Suddenly the whole world has come to an end. There is nobody to support them. They are walking back. What kind of stress it puts on them? Now, it is not that only they are stressed. Each one of us is stressed in different ways. This is an extreme example, but each one of us has stress in many different ways coming from many different quarters. And the body and the mind has to handle that. Only when we can handle stress properly, we remain sane. If we cannot handle the stress properly, we become insane. On top of that, we have the physical side, which is pollution. The air, the soil, and the water is all getting polluted. And the food that we consume and the air we breathe and the water we drink are not clean. Now let me go back to the days when Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutras, or even before that, when Arjuna was asked to become a yogi. Now, those days, we did not have many of these problems of stress and pollution, but the natural process of aging was there. Some amount of stress was there. And even then, in those days, the rishis realized that we must do yoga to maintain ourselves and reach at a higher level. So the problems that we have today in today's life is much, much bigger than the problem that we had at that time. So even during the days when we did not have this level of stress and pollution and difficulties in life and high level of population and all that, even those days yoga was required to maintain your body and mind and reach a higher level of spirituality. Today it is much, much more important. It is so much more important that everyone must somehow get involved and do yoga, because it is impossible for us to maintain our body, mind, sanity without the help, active participation in yoga, practically on a daily basis. Now, so I have given this problem, and what I'm saying is that yoga slows down aging. Yoga does many other things, but since right now I'm only talking about body, I'm saying that yoga slows down aging. So this is my introduction to today's session. And now let us see what we need to do to actually practice, actually get into yoga, understanding and practicing it. So I will be discussing 12 topics. You might have heard Ashtanga Yoga, 8 limbs. So I'll discuss the first 4, which are basically, required for you to reach up to the level of pranayama. So I'll discuss those 4 today. The others can wait. Then we will discuss some details of some mudras and how to breathe, bandhas, nada, speech, hasta mudra, prashanti, and some reading. So these are some of the topics I'll cover. Now, obviously, every topic cannot be covered in details in one session like this. So what I'm going to do, some of the topics I will cover a little bit of details. Some of the topics I will mention for your awareness, but not discuss. The reason I will mention it for your awareness is that after the session, then you can explore through various knowledge that is available openly to everybody through the World Wide Web. You can explore those topics and understand and see which one is more relevant for you. So let's jump in. I have 45 minutes. So let me see what we can do. So the 8 limbs of yoga are called Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana and Samadhi. Out of which Yama means how you deal with others. So this is basically a societal or social code. How I must conduct myself in society in front of others. Niyama means what I must do to myself. How do I deal with myself? Asanam is postures and pranayama is breath control. Now, some of these terms are, when I've written them in English, they are not correctly translated because some of these words may not have an exact English translation, but these are close. I am not discussing Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana and Samadhi in today's session. So we'll discuss the first 4. Now let us see what is Yama. Again, Yama has 5 parts. The first 3 are absolutely important. And I can assure you that if everyone in the world follows the first 3, which is ahimsa, that is non-violence, satya, that is truthfulness, and astya, that is non-stealing. If everybody in the world follows these 3, you will find the world has changed to a more beautiful place. You don't need to do anything else, nothing else. Just these 3 things of ahimsa, satya, and astya. You will find the people will not fight with each other. Communities will not fight with each other. Countries will not fight with each other. Tribes will not fight with each other. So all the basic issues which create difficulties in the society, in the world that we live in of 7.5 billion people, they will evaporate if everybody followed the Yama. The first 3 only. However, it has not happened yet. I do not know when it will happen, but the day it happens, the world will be a peaceful place. Next, let us see how we must maintain ourselves. There are 3 things that we need to do. We need to be clean. Now, shaucha is clean from inside and outside. The body as well as the mind. So, outside body we clean by, taking bath, washing, etc. But there are many ways through which we need to clean our inside. The natural processes of inside cleaning is through the excretory systems. But there are other things that we need to clean. For instance, we have lymph glands. which are not cleaned by these methods. And lymph glands, if they become really dirty, if they become really bad, then they get enlarged and they cause cancer. So there are yogic practices through which we clean the lymph glands, lymph nodes, I'm sorry. Now, that lymph gland cleaning, lymph node cleaning will not happen if you take a bath or if you, wash yourself or so and so forth. Similarly, there are areas of our alimentary canal, like the rectum and the lower part of the colon, which do not get cleaned properly. So there are yogic methods through which you can clean them. If you do not clean them, and if you have constipation and others, you get cancers in colon. In addition to getting constipation and flatulence and gas and acidity and all that, you get colon cancer, which is one of the major causes of cancer, death and disease and all that. So there are ways in yogic practices to clean your lower part of the colon from rectum up to the horizontal colon. So there are different ways. There are many ways you can clean. Suppose somebody catches cold very quickly. So there are ways to clean the nasal area and the area where the cough, etc., accumulates through water. And these are very simple methods, but they ensure that the inside of that cavity where you are breathing in and it's going through, the air is going through that area first, is always kept clean. Second is santosha. This is the reason for unhappiness, lack of santosha. I always want what the other guy has. If that is my life, then I am in bad state. If I always want what somebody else has, and if I am never content with what I have, I am always unhappy. And if I am unhappy, very little can anybody help me because I am unhappy from within. So as long as we are always trying to compete with the next person, trying to get what the other person has got, like some people said yesterday that we want a bigger car, bigger house, bigger this, bigger that. If we are not happy with what we have, then we are in for some difficulties. I'm not saying desire or greed is bad. No. Ambition is necessary in life. But one also needs to balance it with contentment. So when I'm saying that one must be happy with what one has, I'm not saying that you lose your ambition and do nothing. No. You achieve. But you balance it with contentment so that you know what you are achieving and what more you want to achieve. And at every stage of achievement, you become content. And the third thing for dealing with yourself is perseverance. Anything that you do, it requires this tapas. Without tapas, nothing can be achieved. If you are studying, if you are teaching, if you are working as an engineer, if you are working as anything else, perseverance in whatever you are doing, reaching that level of excellence where you know that yes, what I'm doing is the right way or the best way of doing things is very, very important. We read in some of our ancient books of so-and-so has done tapas for so many years and got a boon. I'm not talking about tapas to get a boon. I'm talking about tapas for your day-to-day life. If you get up every day, brush your teeth or have your breakfast or cook your meal or go to college or whatever you do, you must do it systematically, methodically, with sincerity and purpose and persevere. So if you have not finished your chapter today, persevere and finish it tomorrow, but keep at it. Don't give up. So these are the three qualities that we need within ourselves so that we can actively take part in achieving what we want to achieve. Now let's come to practices. Sri Thirumala Krishnamacharya was the guru of Sri B.K. Iyengar and Sri Pattavi Joyce. which Mr. Tyagiraj, Professor Tyagiraj mentioned yesterday. He learned yoga through many means. He went to ashrams, he studied, he did a lot of studies. And he said, and he is one of the pioneers of yoga in this country. So he said, use asana for the problems of the body and use pranayama for the problems of the mind. Let us take this as an advice and look at what we will do in terms of asanas and what we will do in terms of pranayama. Remembering that the asanas that we will do and anything that we do to support the asanas, as you will see very soon, will be for the body. And we will do pranayama and whatever we need to support pranayama, again, as you will see, for the mind. So let's come to asana. You heard this phrase yesterday, sthira sukham asanam, which means that asanam is a posture which is firm and pleasant. Sthira means firm, sukham means pleasant. So, when you see somebody doing an asana where the the leg is above the head and hand is somewhere that you cannot figure out how it went there, do not bother. Do not get worried. Do not get disheartened. It is not necessary. Asana is not being a circus artist. Asana fundamentally is that you should be able to sit or be in any posture comfortably and sit still. Be in that position still. So that stillness, being firm, sthira, is very, very important. And while you're doing that, it should not cause you any pain or discomfort. So the objective of learning and practicing asana and the things before that is to ensure that whichever posture you want to attain, you ultimately attain it where there is pleasantness and there is firmness. You are not, fidgeting, you are not moving left and right, you are not thinking, oh, I have a pain here, I have a pain there. You have attained that state where you are in that asana without difficulty, with pleasantness, and you are there and you can be there for a long time. This is the basic definition of asana. But before we do asana, we need to do what is called Sithilakarana. Why we need to do this? Because as we saw that we have so many joints and muscles. And if we have to do asana and attain that pleasantness in a particular posture, we need to ensure that our joints are free, they are well lubricated, they're working smoothly, and the muscles are also functioning nicely. They don't get torn easily and so on and so forth. Unless we do this Sithilakarana or loosening, then getting into any posture will become very difficult. So we'll spend a little time in looking at both this lower body and upper body Sithilakarana, because for anybody to start Yogasana, for anybody to start yoga, the starting point after yama and niyama, which are basically the social and personal ethics, is physically at the loosening level. So we will look at lower body and upper body loosening, how to do it. So can you see 8 feet by 6 feet?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
So this is the space we require. And please cover the space with some material, something which is not too thick or too thin, something which is comfortable and made of natural fiber. Please do not use synthetic mat for yoga. Please use cotton or wool or jute or any natural fiber. So cover the floor with some kind of a natural fiber matting, and then let us see what are the things we will do. Now, let us understand why we are doing these 12, stretches. Some of these stretches, which I have mentioned as stretch, may also be called some asana. So like the last one is called Pavan Muktasana. Similarly, some other stretches can look very similar to asana. But remember, the fundamental difference between a stretch and an asana is that In a stretch your body, you are moving the body, moving parts of the body. In asana, you are not making any movement. You arrive at that asana, that posture, and then you stay there. These are the fundamental difference between, any exercise or any stretch and asana. So here, all the things are movements. So we will start in the lower body with the toe, because it is the farthest and it needs a proper movement. Ankle. The ankle takes a maximum load of our body on a daily basis, because as we stand, it is the ankle that takes the maximum load. So we need to be very, very careful about the ankle as well as the toes. Kneecap. Most people, as they grow old, they have problem with their kneecap, because the kneecaps stop functioning and then they have difficulties. Then we will see buttock tightening, leg stretching, leg raising, single leg cycling. So these are all related to different parts of the leg, knee circling. And also they also work to some extent up to your pelvic joint. And then we come to spine and Pavan Muktasana. So these are the few things that we will do in the lower body. And these stretches will ensure that up to the spine, middle of the spine, your body, all the joints and the muscles have been warmed up. Not every one of the joints and the muscles, but most of the relevant joints and the muscles have been worked to an extent that they are well lubricated and the muscles are properly toned. So we look at them one by one. So in this one, what we are doing is, we are starting from the toe. The whole body is still. We are lying down on a mat. We are moving only the toes away from the body and towards the body. So as we move away from the body, the breathing has to be coordinated. So we inhale as we move the toes away from the body, and inhale as we exhale as we move it towards the body. And we do this movement about 10 times. And then once we move it away from the body, we keep it there, the toes, for about 10 counts. So you will see that, so in this posture, you keep the toes in this way for 10 counts. Then you bring the toes back and keep it for 10 counts. So this is how you have loosened your toes. Now we'll go to the ankles. In the ankle, what we are going to do is, we will now do the movement where the ankle along with the toes will be pushed forward, and then the ankle along with the toe will be brought back. So we will keep doing this movement of going forward and backward, going forward and backward, and do it 10 times. And then 10th time, we'll keep it in that position of pushed forward, and then bring it back and keep it in this position of pulled back. So we will do it 10 times and then hold it for count of 10. So we have done toe stretching and ankle stretching. Now we will rotate the ankle. To rotate the ankle, we will keep doing circles in there. So we will keep rotating the ankle together so that the ankle gets a 360-degree motion. Not really, but whatever maximum it can go, because there are certain movements that are restricted in terms of the ankle. Now we will do kneecap tightening. You will find it a little difficult to see, but you just watch the kneecaps, you will find that I am tightening them and loosening them, one leg at a time. Left leg at right leg. I am tightening and loosening one leg at a time. And this single exercise will improve any knee condition tremendously. A whole lot of elderly people have to do this to remove their knee pain. Whole lot of younger people, if they do this, they will build strength in their knees and ensure that they never get knee pain. Now we go to leg raising, buttock tightening. So buttock tightening is that you lie down and just keep raising the buttock up and down. So you keep tightening the buttock up and down, up and down. I mean, the body moves up and down automatically. You keep tightening the buttock. What it does is, along with the buttock, it also tightens some other muscles and gives some movement to your pelvic area. Then we look at the legs. So we raise the legs. Practice 7. Leg lift. So we fold the legs and then we raise one leg at a time and hold it. You can also do this with the other leg stretched out. Here I have shown it with the other leg folded, but you can also do it with the other leg stretched out. For elderly people, one should do it with folded legs. Younger people should do it with legs stretched out. Right? Now we go to leg cycling. Practice. So here we will take one leg at a time and do some cycling motion. Notice the sole, the feet, how it is moving. I'm showing this in slow motion. You have to do it a little faster. Yeah, this is the normal speed. Then you do it in reverse. Then you do the other leg. Right? Now we will go to the next one and we will circle the knees. One knee, one leg at a time. So this is slow motion. You're drawing a circle with the knee in the air without the feet touching the. So this is a normal speed. And similarly, we do it with the other leg, and we'll do it both the legs clockwise as well as anti-clockwise. Right? Now we will do turning the spine. Here, take this stick. Here the legs have to be folded and your head is turning to one side, the legs are turning to the other side. The legs are joined together with the feet and the knees. And it gives a beautiful massage and twist to the whole spine. So again, you do this, and then at the end, you hold that position on each side for some time, for a count of 10 or so. This is the other way of turning the spine, where the legs are spread. So you spread the legs to shoulder length width, and then you turn. Again, you turn the legs to one side and the head to the other side. Try to touch the right knee to the floor and the left knee on the right foot. Start, sir. Under the sun. Right. And finally, we do Pavana Muktasana. So here first you do it one leg at a time. Again, this one you can do with the other leg stretched out. Again, for elderly, the leg should be folded. For a younger person, the leg should be stretched out. So when you're pulling it in, you're exhaling. When you're pushing it back, you're inhaling. Then you do it with the other leg. And finally, you do it with both legs. So I'll stop this presentation here and go back to the earlier presentation. Can you see loosening Sithila Karan?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we have seen how we have done this for the lower body. Similarly, we will do the upper body, but I'm not showing it today. Tomorrow, we will do many of these exercises. So you will follow me as I'm doing it live. So due to lack of time, I am not showing the upper body part today. Now we will move to asanas. Now there is one is called Dhyanasana and one is called Swasthyasana. So Dhyanasana are basically postures in which you take the postures for doing your dhyana or meditation and all that. But by themselves also they are good postures. So Sukhasana is one of those postures where you sit in the position that is most comfortable on the floor, where the legs are how we normally sit in Indian system on the floor. This is called Sukhasana. Now let's go to Vajrasana, where you can see that you are sitting on the heel. Both the buttocks are on two heels. Your spine is straight. Your hands are in some mudra. We'll come to mudra on the thighs, on the knees. So this is called Vajrasana. This is a Dhyanasana pose. You can do meditation and other things in this. But Vajrasana has another impact. After your meal, if you sit in Vajrasana for 10-15 minutes, your digestion becomes very good. But remember, it is not easy to attain this pose and stay in this pose for 15 minutes. Your knees and the sole of your feet and your certain parts of thigh and etc. Will start paining. Also, you will lose blood circulation for some time in the legs. So it is not easy. But with practice, one can definitely sit for 15-20 minutes, half an hour. When I started, I could do it for half a minute, 1 minute. But today, I can do it for 15-20 minutes without any difficulty. And this, after every major meal, let's say lunch or dinner, especially after dinner if you are at home, because lunch you might not be at home, except in pandemic. If you do this, you will find that your gastric difficulties of digestion and flatulence and acidity, etc., will go down and you will actually digest more food than you were doing earlier. Now let's come to Siddhasana. Siddhasana, I have shown it with a particular mudra. Siddhasana is where you take your left heel and put it near where your anal opening is, just between your genital organs and your anal opening. Press the heel there, and then you bring your right heel and place it on the left foot. In any of these postures, the spine has to be straight, the head has to be straight. It is said that of all the asanas of which are done sitting, Siddhasana is the best. So this is the best posture for doing any dhyana, and you will see many sculptures cast in stone all over India, even outside India, where Siddhasana pose has been used. Because this is a typical pose for dhyana, but this is also a typical pose where just by sitting in this pose, even without knowing what is dhyana, you can calm down your mind. So Siddhasana is supposed to be the best asana of all the sitting postures. Now we come to Padmasana. Here you place your heel on one thigh and place the other heel on the other thigh, and place your hands in some mudra on your thigh or on the knees. Again, the spine has to be straight, the head has to be straight, and this again is a starting position, or what is called sthiti position, for several other asanas. So this is also one of the sitting dhyanasanas. Now we come to Gomukhasana. Gomukhasana is you take the right leg and put it, take the left leg and put it under the right buttock, and take the right leg and put it over the left leg. Then you touch your fingertips or hold them if you can at the back. Again, spine should be straight, and this asana is very good for young people. It handles the excitement that young people get in terms of sexual urges, and it controls that urge. It does not increase or decrease, but it handles it properly and beautifully. So in fact, this is one of the asanas that my guru had given me, along with a few others, when I was 15 years old. So Gomukhasana is a great asana for handling the sexual, urges and having control over your sexual urges. It also does a whole lot of other things, but I'm just mentioning the special ones. Bhujangasana, this was demonstrated, I think, twice yesterday. This and a few others, like Dhanurasana, which was also demonstrated yesterday, and Ustrasana, these are asanas for the spine. So in Bhujangasana, you have to ensure that your navel is on the ground. It is not lifted. Like you can see, my hands are folded and my body is up, but my navel is still touching the ground. If I straighten my hands, then my navel will go up. That is not Bhujangasana. Bhujangasana, the navel has to touch the ground, and then you have to push up as much as you can, and the head has to go back as much as you can. And this is great pose for your spine flexibility, and there are various other benefits. Dhanurasana, Bhujangasana, and Ustrasana, they all bend the spine in 3 different parts of the spine. So Bhujangasana is bending it towards the lower end, Dhanurasana bends it in the middle, and Ustrasana bends it on the top as well as in the middle. So this Bhujangasana is for the spine, and it gives great benefits in terms of flexibility. And as we have seen, that the spinal cord carries 31 of our nerve pairs. So it is very, very important that our spinal cord, our spinal system is proper, flexible, so that the nerves, they can come and go, they can exit and enter the spinal cord easily without any difficulty. When the spinal cord is not flexible, it becomes rigid or there is damage. What happens is the bones of the spinal cord sit on the nerves, and that causes pain. One of the most famous pains is called sciatica pain. The nerve comes from, one of the bottom pairs of discs, and it goes down to the legs. And when those discs are compressed, and the nerve gets compressed, which is quite common because we sit quite a lot on our buttock, and those lower end of our lower back gets stressed. So a lot of people get sciatica pain. In fact, it is said that about 10% people in the world get sciatica pain. So these asanas are important to maintain our spinal health. Next we come to Sarvangasana. This is a very different kind of asana. We have seen that our body has so much of fluid. It has blood, it has the hormones, it has food, and as we are sitting or standing, due to gravity, most of them are pulled downwards. Hence, what happens is some parts of the glands and the body parts and organs, they get insufficient supply of various liquids. Sarvangasana and Sirshasana, which I have not shown here, these are two asanas where you reverse the body and allow gravity to function in the opposite way. So what happens is, in Sarvangasana, you have closed your neck, so your thyroid and other glands don't get supply, but all the other glands, right from tip of the toe till your shoulder, they get additional supply. So if you stay in this position for sufficient amount of time, what happens? All those glands and organs which are starved slightly of various fluids, mostly blood and hormones and other excretions, liquids, they get good supply, and then they start functioning better. One point to be remembered is that after Sarvangasana, one must do an asana called Matsyasana, which I have not shown here, where the neck goes back. Because in this asana, you have closed the neck to the front, you need to open it up. So after Sarvangasana, if you have done Sarvangasana for 5 minutes, you do the reverse Matsyasana. Reverse meaning it is not reversed like this, just the neck is reversed for again 5 minutes to ensure that those muscles, those glands and areas get the supply. Now I'm running out of time. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip the subsequent asanas like Shashankasana, Ustrasana and all that. Dr. Irappa.
Sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you give me another 5-10 minutes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. No issue. No issue. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I will skip these charts and mudra and come to pranayama, because something very important needs to be discussed in pranayama. So here again, I have some shlokas which you need to understand, but I will skip it. But come to this slide. Now, pranayama, I'm not doing the definition, but it says that chale vate chalam chittam nischale nischalam bhavet yogi sranutvam apnoti tato vayum nirodhayet. It basically says that if respiration gets disturbed, mind gets disturbed. If respiration is restrained, mind becomes steady. And this is the whole thing that even Acharya Krishnamacharya said, that pranayama is to handle the mind. So it is very, very important for us to understand this. So I will explain very quickly what is breathing. You see, our lungs is not only in our chest. The lung, the upper part of the lung is somewhere close to our shoulder under the clavicular or the shoulder bones. And then the lower part, which is above the diaphragm obviously, but goes towards our abdomen. When we normally breathe, we feel that we are breathing in our chest, which is the middle part. And the lower and the upper part, the abdominal and the clavicular part of the chest, is not used very much. They are there. So when we are in fright, suppose we suddenly encounter something dangerous and we start breathing very heavily, then these parts come to work. But otherwise, some of these parts are dormant or they're little used. So we need to ensure, first of all, that all the parts are fully energized for us to do the breathing properly. So before we do pranayama, we need to know how to breathe properly. And once we know how to breathe properly, pranayama will become easier. Just like we need to do loosening of muscles and joints and organs and glands to do asana, we need to learn how to do breathing before we can do pranayama properly. So I will show you 3 ways of breathing. Okay. So this is the first breathing. This is called dog breathing, where what you're doing, you're sitting in Vajrasana, putting your palms on the ground, your head is straight, your body is slightly forward, and you are sticking your tongue out and breathing deep. So in this, what happens is the lower part of your lungs, they get activated. You can do this for a few cycles, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and the lower part of your lungs get activated. Then you come to activate or reactivate the central part, where you are on 4 legs and you are breathing in. You are breathing in as your body is going down and head is going up, and breathing out as your head is coming down and body is going up. So breathing in, breathing out, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in. This gives good workout to the central part of your brain, of your lungs. And then we come to the third one, which is to activate the clavicular part of the lungs. So again, you sit in Vajrasana, you bend down, and then you measure about 8 inches your chin from the ground. Stick your tongue out slightly and start breathing fast. This, what it does is, it gives a good workout to the clavicular part of your lungs. Right? So with these 3, if you do this regularly, you will find that your breathing capability has become more. And how to test that? When you do certain pranayama like Bhramari, or even when you just plain do Kumbhaka, you just take a deep breath and hold it, you will find that your duration will be easy. So these 3 breathing techniques are very, very important, not only for us to get into pranayama, but even otherwise to improve our breathing capability. Because remember, as we have seen, that we need to pump 7,500 liters of air every day. And if we are breathing more, utilizing more parts of the lungs, then the number of cycles we require to pump that 7,500 liters will reduce. So our breath per minute will come down and body will become better. And it is said, I do not know how true it is, that your life, the length of your life is counted by the number of breaths that you have. That means if you slow down your breathing, your life becomes longer and better. I cannot prove this, but this is what is said in the scriptures, and I believe it, that if you slow down your breathing, then you get a better life and a longer life. So to do that, these 3 breathing techniques are very, very important, following which you can do pranayama. So I will quickly touch upon one which we call Kapalbhati. Kapalbhati is actually not a pranayama. It is one of the techniques of Shaucha, that is cleaning. But a lot of people call it Kapalbhati pranayama. So I have put it here. Here, what you do is you clean a whole lot of your lungs in a beautiful and powerful way. What you do, you sit in Siddhasana or Sukhasana or Padmasana or Vajrasana, in any of those postures, and then what you're doing is you are not controlling your breath through your nose, you are forcing your stomach to go back. You are using your abdominal muscles to force your stomach to go back. That pushes the diaphragm, it pushes the lungs, and the air goes out automatically. And that will ensure, because it is done by force, there is a lot of pressure, a lot of bad air that was not going out otherwise from your lungs, a lot of carbon dioxide and a lot of toxicity, it goes out. But the reason why it is called Kapalbhati is not because it cleanses the lungs, because it cleanses the brain. Kapal means the forehead. So Bhati means, makes it bright. So Kapalbhati is basically an action by which you improve your brain function by controlling your breath or lungs through your abdominal muscles. I can assure you that if you do Kapalbhati regularly, several times a day, and several cycles, let's say you do 40 cycles once and then do three of those 40 cycle sets at one time, and then do it again at some other time. But remember that you must be in empty stomach when you're doing this. If you do this several times today, I can assure you, your memory, your comprehension, your cognizance of what is happening, your power of reasoning and logic will definitely improve. Whatever statement I am making are mostly by my experience. If it is not by experience, I will mention that it is in the books. So here, Kapalbhati, I am assuring you that if you do this, you will improve your brain function without any doubt. Just as you will improve your breathing capability by doing those 3 breathing exercises, you will improve your brain function by doing Kapalbhati. Now we come to something that you have seen yesterday called Nadi Shodhana or Anulom Vilom Pranayama. This again may be called a pranayama or may be called a shaucha because it is called Shodhana. Nadi means not nerves. These are nadis for which there is no English translation. There are channels of communication, and Shodhana means cleaning. So Nadi Shodhana or Nadi Shuddhi may be called a pranayama or may be called a shaucha. It is to cleanse your nadis, not nerves. Let me repeat. These are nadis which are channels of communication in our body. They say there are 72,000 nadis, and there are chakras where they accumulate and then radiate again. And there are 3 main nadis, Ida, Pingala, Sushumna. I'm not going into the theory. But yesterday you were demonstrated that Nadi Shodhana is the beginning of further pranayama exercises. So once you do your Shodhana of the nadis, then when you do other pranayamas, then they become more effective. Without Nadi Shodhana, your other pranayamas are less effective. So Nadi Shodhana, very simply, is you breathe in through the left nose by creating what is called Nashika Mudra. Nashika Mudra is you fold your middle finger and index fold your ring, index and middle finger, and you have the thumb to hold your right nose, and you have your ring finger to hold your left nose. So first you hold your right nose with your thumb and release all the air that is in the chest. It is going out. Once you have released it, you take it in to the same nose, that is right nose. Then you close the right nose with your ring finger and release the air to the right nose, and then take it back to the right nose. This is one cycle of Nadi Shodhana. You should typically practice 9 cycles of Nadi Shodhana. You can do a lot more, but the minimum is 9 cycles. That is a count of 36. Finally, you end it by the 37 count, which is releasing the air through the left nostril. So you start Nadi Shodhana by starting with releasing air with the left nostril, and you end it on the 37 count by releasing air on the left nostril again. In between, you have done 9 rounds of 4 counts each. Left nostril in, left nostril out, right nostril in, right nostril out. Now the point to be remembered here is that there is a method or way of counting which is shown below. 1:0:1, 1:1:1, and so on. What it means is that 1:1, that is 1:0:1, means the time you take to inhale and exhale is the same. And the middle 0 means that you are not holding the air inside. So when you inhale and then hold the air and then exhale, that holding of the air is called Kumbhaka. You can do Kumbhaka in 2 ways. Either you can do Kumbhaka after you have done exhalation. That is called Bajya Kumbhaka. That means the air has gone out and you are doing Kumbhaka. Or you can do Kumbhaka after you have done inhale, which is called Anta Kumbhaka, where you are holding the air inside. So whatever it is, whether you're doing Anta Kumbhaka or Vajra Kumbhaka, the middle one is for Kumbhaka. So you exhale, hold, inhale, and the ultimate ratio should be that your inhalation to holding to exhalation should be in the ratio 1:4:2. So you inhale for count of 1 or count of 4 or count of 8, then hold it for 4 times that count. So if you have counted 4 while inhaling, you count 16 while holding, and then count while exhaling. That means your exhalation should be double the time than inhalation. But initially these are difficult to do. So you start off by inhaling, exhaling with the same time. And once you're comfortable and you're able to do it without any jerky motion, when it is smooth and you're able to do it for a count of 8 or 10 or 12, then you go into doing Kumbhaka and then slowly start increasing and ultimately reaching the ratio of 1:4:2. So if you can do a count of 16:64:32, a count meaning basically a second, that is very, very good. That is what a lot of very experienced yoga practitioners do. I cannot do it, but it is one of the ultimate. If you can do it, you have really reached a very high level. But if you can do 2, 8, 4, then 4, 16, 8 is pretty good. Okay. Now I have already taken 15 minutes more, so I will skip mudras. I will just talk about. This is the final final slide. Siddhasana is known as the best asana. There are 3 bandhas that we did not cover, out of which Uddiyana bandha is called the best bandha, and A is called the best alphabet in Sanskrit. So rishis have found that the A alphabet or the A sound is the best sound in the world. just as Siddhasana is the best asana and Uddiyana Bandha is the best bandha. What is this A sound? When we make A sound, it comes from the guts. But this A sound, when we make, it creates a particular frequency, and it is said that the frequency 432 megahertz somehow relates to the cosmic frequency of same 432 hertz. I'm not sorry, not megahertz, 432 hertz. How this figure came? This cosmic figure of 432 was actually measured by taking what is called the cosmic noise, and then they filtered it to remove all the other noise and found that there is a continuous noise of 432 hertz all over the universe. And we may someday understand that better in another session, that today Higgs boson has proved the Higgs field, which is said to be permeating all the whole universe, which contains Higgs boson, which has been proved experimentally that yes, such a field exists. So our Munis and Rishis, they found that this A sound is the best sound in the world, and it is said to be the cosmic sound. So when we say Om, which is basically three parts, A, U, and M, A, U, M, Aum. And in Sanskrit, when you combine A and U, it becomes O. So the primordial sound is said to be A, U, M. And we chant this at the beginning, at the end, anytime. I will chant it 3 times. Please listen. Chant it any time that you are stressed. You will feel immediate relief. Anytime you are stressed, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and chant this. You will feel better, I can assure you. Now we'll go to the last slide. Which is called Vishram or Vishranti. After any exercise that you do, any asanas that you do, you need to cool down your body and mind, and that is when you do this asana called Savasana. You lie down on your back, relaxed, feet apart, hands apart, facing upward, palms facing upward, your eyes closed, and you take one breath in, and as you are exhaling, you start relaxing the body. You start from the top of your head. As you exhale, you imagine and relax the head. You take a deep breath. I'll just explain. So you lie down in that pose called Savasana. Take a deep breath. Exhale slowly. And as you're exhaling, think of your head and relax it slowly. You will find that you can relax your top of your head. You can relax your eyes, nose, inside your brain, the skull, the mouth. Then you take another breath and relax your throat region. You take another deep breath and slowly relax your right arm, left arm, your clavicular area, back, front. Go down to the teeth. Slow with 5 or 10 or 15 deep breath, relaxation, exhalation. You slowly relax your whole body. And you lie down in that position for some time with your focus in between your eyes. You stay there. And when you have sufficient focus, you leave your body and go somewhere in the sky where your body is still on the ground, but you are somewhere else. what I do is I had gone for scuba diving, where I got a beautiful experience. I was inside the ocean, I was weightless, the whole ocean was around me. I could see up to some point and not beyond. I had to do nothing, I was floating automatically inside the water. And everything was taken care of. And you stay in that position when you're not in your body, but you're suspended somewhere. In the air, in the water, somewhere. Stay there for some time. And then slowly come out of it by moving your fingers and toes. And then you get up. I will show you tomorrow how to do that. And then certain finishing things, you rub your palm and all that. Tomorrow we will demonstrate. So with that, I conclude my session. I'm sorry I have taken 21 minutes more than I was allotted. I'm really sorry of the technical problem. So please excuse me. Thank you very much, and everyone who is participating.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
So, Hirappa sir?
Sir, do you want to take any questions? Yeah. So, participant, you can ask any
Yeah, you can.
So, participant can ask the questions now. Any questions? Chepintaj madam?
Sir, one question. Sir.
Okay, sir.
Sir, one question.
Okay, ask
Yeah.
sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, that is Kapalabhati can do heart patient, sir.
Can do what?
Operated. Kapalabhati pranayama, that is Kapalabhati breathing exercise. Can we do those who are heart patient?
Heart patient? No,
yes,
no.
Yes, sir, sir is asking that.
Heart patient cannot do.
Okay.
Heart patient have to do Anulom Vilom Pranayama. Then they have to do Bhramari Pranayama. Then depending upon whether, because generally heart patient people have slightly higher blood pressure. So if that is the case, there are other pranayamas which control the blood pressure. I am not in a position to give a prescription here in this kind of a forum, because that for each particular patient it has to be seen. But there are definitely other pranayamas which a heart patient can do to reduce your blood pressure. And the most important thing is, as you do Anulom Vilom or pranayama, Anulom Vilom pranayama, you will all automatically reduce your breathing speed. The number of times you breathe every minute will come down. So that will help a heart patient tremendously. But definitely Kapalbhati, and there are things like Uddiyana Bandha, which puts pressure on the heart patient cannot do. So you have to be a little careful. But anything where there is, the movement is slow, movement of the breath is slow, there are some which will benefit a heart patient.
Okay, anyone?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir, yes, sir. Ask, sir. Anup, sir, please, sir.
What I wanted to know in this pandemic conditions, we are using the mask a lot. In fact, it was so interesting. I listening to it from my car. So there is a disruption, I suppose, in the breathing. So is there any way we can, we can.
Sir, your
Okay,
voice
I
is not
heard-
clear, sir.
Network, some network, I
Network
think.
issues, sir.
He's having
Arup
network.
Chatterjee, sir.
Okay, so I will, if I have understood the question from the first part, which says that in pandemic we are wearing mask, and that definitely is creating breathing difficulties.
Compensate this in this pandemic time.
How to compensate? Yeah. So first thing is that our breathing ability will increase by those 3 breathing techniques that I showed. which is dog breathing, tiger breathing, and rabbit breathing. That will increase our lungs' ability to handle more air when we have a free flow of air. So that is number one. Because once we do those three, it will automatically improve. There are certain other ways, which today, of course, I have not shown, other ways by which you can further improve your lung capability. Which again, since the question has been asked, they are forceful, so everybody cannot do it. So the ideal option is that we have to increase the capacity of the lungs by doing this over a period of time, because lung capacity cannot be increased suddenly, in one day. In fact, any yogic activity takes some time for it to take effect. So it needs that preparation of doing those breathing exercises. Now, as far as mask is concerned, mask has to be worn wherever it is prescribed. At other places, please do not wear a mask, because wearing a mask all the time is definitely not good. And when you're exercising, do not wear a mask. Please exercise in a safe place and do not wear a mask. Wearing a mask during exercise like walking, cycling, or any other exercise is dangerous and harmful, and people have suffered because of lack of oxygen. People have even died because of that in the last 1 year. So definitely do not do any physical exercise with your mask on. When you have to walk outside for some work, please walk slowly so that the exertion is less.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.